Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this music, we stop it really quick because they're still afraid of being sued, and we still haven't figured out how to do theme songs without getting sued. Then you know it's an episode of Classical Gas, and the only theme show in the bathtub where we dare to ask the perennial question: should we bother reading the famous classics of literature or not? And usually we find out most of the time they are worth reading. With the exception of possibly Henry James, almost all the classics I've read I tend to enjoy, but some are better than others. So we have we have a really complicated schedule, set of standards for these episodes. One is we give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. We're like we're the Siskel and Ebert of classical literature. And then we have the third category, which is hell yeah. We're going to cut right to the chase. Hell yeah, to talk about the latest in our sub theme series, which is Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. We just reread Crime and Punishment over the last couple of weeks. I finished it about 10 days ago. I never got around to doing this piece, so I've already forgotten the names of all the characters. Crime and Punishment is one of the hell yeahs of literature. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This is I can't say effing because I'm on the grandparents and sometimes the grannies and the kids come watch this. But it's an effing great book. Okay, really effing great, freaking good. I mean, by freaking good novel. I reread it for the first time since I was about 21 or 22, and my personal history with Crime and Punishment was that Dostoevsky was one of the first, quote, serious literary writers I read as a kid and loved him. And I read Crime and Punishment the first time when I was like 16 or 17 in high school, and I couldn't put it down. And then several years later, I read it again. I couldn't put it down. And both times, and I swear this is true, both times when I got to the point that the opening 150 pages of this book, 100 pages, are really stressful. They're incredibly stressful. If you haven't read it, that's the only part of the plot I'll sort of give away, which is in the opening 100 pages. The central character is a man named Raskolnikov. He's almost the entire point of view for the entire large novel. You're almost always in Raskolnikov's point of view. He's a broke student. He's obviously starting to have mental breakdowns, and he's extremely bright. He's also overly ambitious, and he's incredibly unhappy. And he's just had an unhappy life looking for his place in the world. And in the opening pages, he goes off to meet this old Jewish moneylender in town, and he's devising some plan. And as you read along, you find that he's going to murder her and take her money. Why he murders her and takes her money is sort of the mystery of the novel. But he decides he's going to murder this woman and take her money. He goes to her house, and in the course of murdering her, her sister, Lizaveta, I think her name was. I think it's her sister, or it's a local woman who's really like an angel. Everybody loves this woman. She's considered one of the nicest people in town, and even Raskolnikov likes her. She comes in the middle of the murder, and he kills her with an axe. He kills both of these women with an axe, and it's brutal, really brutal, terrifying scenes, because you're in his point of view, and you're doing these horrible things. And then there's a stressful way he's escaping, and in the escape, which is stressful by itself, he goes home and he's so racked with guilt and horror at what he's done and confusion at what he's done that he gets sick and he goes to bed. And Dostoevsky takes you right through the intensity of all these emotions. And I remember both times I read this novel as a kid and as a young man, at the time I went through that passage where he was sick, I got sick. I'm sure it was just a coincidence. But I was really sick for several days. And I was just reading the wonderful Joseph Frank biography. I have it on Kindle, I'm afraid, so I can't show it to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful biography. I'm reading the condensed one-volume biography, but he talks about when the book came out, when Crime and Punishment first came out, in a journal that was serialized in Russia. People claimed that they were getting sick when they read this. I was the first time I ever heard about this. It is a really incredibly emotional and torturous opening 150 pages, and the whole book is great, but that first 100 pages. And this time I'm happy to report that as a 66-year-old man, I read through that passage. I didn't get sick. That's the maturity of my life, as I've grown up enough that I can read Crime and Punishment. I won't get sick. I read which one did I read? So I read this translation, which is the one I read when I was a kid, Sidney Monas, I don't know anything about the translators except that I like this translation. I also had the Kindle version, and no, I'm not buying Kindle books unless I can help it. And that's the Jesse Colson translation. I bought that years ago when I first got a Kindle, and I used to buy whatever sales classics came on. And I would read this sometimes in bed because on my eyes and stuff, it's easier to read. Or when we traveled a bit when I was reading it. And I'd say both the translations are great. I slightly preferred the Colson translation, the Oxford edition, but that was just my personal feelings. It's a wonderful book. So what we're doing is we're reading through. Here's my martini. We don't have the floral patterns anymore. Things have changed. Things change here at the bathtub. Dodo's in the background there. Dodo, do you want to come out? No? And I read this over about a week, about 10 days when I was reading it. I was doing a little of the reading on this course of it, and I was reading through the Joseph Frank biography. Okay, we're also reading, I haven't touched this in a few weeks, the George Steiner's Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and we're just basically over the next few months going to read through all whenever I feel like it, read some Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. All right. Should you read it? Yes, you should read it. I also, all my life, even though I haven't read the book in 40 years, I'm used to give this to young readers. So like my students always, but particularly 14, 15, 16-year-olds, I would give it to them. And when they read it, they always seem to enjoy it. It sort of crosses out, it goes right outside the world of literature, and it just kind of grabs you from the beginning. There's a lot of things that Dostoevsky does brilliantly in this book. And one, again, I'm learning these from the Frank biography, is he originally wanted to do it as a first-person novel, like he did Notes from Underground. And he tried it several times, and he changed the third person. And it's a brilliant move to make it a third person. So it's not a kind of psychotic person who unreliable narrator and all that stuff. You're sort of behind Raskolnikov, and you're sharing in his confusion all through the book. For example, when he goes to murder this woman, and he ends up murdering two women, you don't really quite know why he does it. And I remember when I was, you hear about it in literature courses, or it gets taught, or you read essays about it, that he was trying to, he was testing the Superman hypothesis of Nietzsche, and he believed that, people of extraordinary abilities were capable of creating their own rules and so forth. And that's one of the explanations that comes across from most of the people who come up with explanations for the murder and for Raskolnikov's actions are coming from around him. So, for example, about 200 or 300 pages into the book, his friend, he had a friend named Razumikin. Don't write me about the pronunciations. Razumikin, I think. And he's a big, bearish, happy, supportive friend. And he reminds Raskolnikov of an essay he wrote about, which is kind of a Superman hypothesis in it. A lot of people remind him of different things. At one point, he thinks that he wanted to murder the woman because he wanted to take her money and do good deeds with it. But then as soon as he gets the money from her house, he buries it and doesn't want to go near it. The way I read the book is Raskolnikov never really knows why he did anything. He's an extremely unhappy kid. He's had a torturous life. He's been broke. He's failed to become good at school. He's done really badly in school. He feels ashamed of himself. It's a book a lot about shame. And it's very interesting the way Dostoevsky sets the book up. So you have this opening where you're pretty much in his head. He's a total loner, has almost no friends. Even his landlady's trying to get him thrown out. And his relationship with the landlady comes through later. We find out later that he was going to marry the landlady's daughter, who was supposed to have been unattractive and kind of a weird character, and she dies. We don't find this out till later. So all we know is what this poor kid is doing when he's going and commits this horrible crime. And after he commits the crime, the total confusion and welter of emotions that come through him. And from that point on, the novel becomes really interesting. Dostoevsky takes us away from just Raskolnikov, and all these people start to come into the picture. And this loner of Raskolnikov meets a guy named Marmeladov, and through Marmeladov he meets this very poor family, and the wife of Marmeladov and his daughter named Sonia, who becomes a very important character in the book. And he meets these people for whom he wants to help. He wants to help these people, which was one of his motives for killing the old woman. And then he has his friend Razumikin, with whom he has some intellectual interests, but he's a man who really supports him and loves Raskolnikov, and kind of decides he wants to help this kid, even though he's not very pleasant most of the time. And then out of nowhere, his mother and his sister come, and he loves them, but he feels totally distant from them. He feels like he can't talk to them because of particularly what he's gone through. And his sister she's been hounded out of her job as a governess, I think, or as a teacher, by a man who's trying to molest her, basically, as a hired help. He wants her to do what he wants. And he's a guy named, I want to say, Smerdyakov, who is one of the real sleazy characters in literature. He's a sleazy guy who's perfectly content with the sleaziness, and he's sort of the ultimate picture of what Raskolnikov would be if he believed in this, the person with his own morality can live his own life. And then there's a guy named Luzhin. Again, don't get me all my names wrong. I may be wrong on that. Who is decided he's proposed marriage to Raskolnikov's sisters, and all these characters come into St. Petersburg. I think it's in St. Petersburg. I don't remember. They all come into this town, and they kind of start orbiting around Raskolnikov, and his reactions, the way he deals with these people, bring him out. And it's kind of a horrifying thing for him to come out of this kind of isolation and to start seeing himself in all these social relationships after committing this horrible act. I don't think I ever got bored by a single scene in this book. I remembered it as being kind of a sloppier novel, and Dostoevsky as being a much more emotive, kind of crazy-ish, kind of just a genius savant almost. And I don't believe that at all anymore, particularly after reading this wonderful Frank biography and then reading this again. It's a huge step forward from all of the earlier Dostoevskys, including House of the Dead, which is has some rudiments in this book. But as a novel, he just does some brilliant things with this novel. He gets you so wrapped up in Raskolnikov's life, and you really you feel for the guy. You're not having his voice shouting at you in his head as if it was first person. You're sort of identifying with him. You have a little distance from him, and you really do identify with him when he's engaged in all these different relationships with all these people who come through town. The central relationship becomes Sonia, this girl who's the daughter of this man. She's become a prostitute to save her family, and that could have been very sentimental and almost Dickensianly sentimental. I don't think he screws that up. I think Dostoevsky pulls that relationship off, and her concern for him. There's also, I forgot the greatest character in it, and I can't remember his name either, but there's a police detective who apparently the writers who wrote. I remember reading an interview with the two guys who created the Columbo character, claimed that they created him based on this character. And he's a detective who's always unassuming. He says, "Hi, how are you? Come and have a drink, and let's hang out." Oh, who killed that person, and so forth. And he sort of figures it's Raskolnikov really quickly, and he plays a lot of games with him to try to prove that he's the guilty person. And some of those scenes really, really wind you up. When this police inspector comes and pretends he's being a friend, and Raskolnikov suspects him, and you're not entirely sure, but it's very clear as the novel develops that this guy is playing a lot of games on Raskolnikov. Anyway, hell yeah! It's a hell yeah! I really recommend it to anyone who, certainly if you haven't read it. If you haven't read it since you were young, like me, you will probably enjoy it again. I think it's a sort of kind of dark, macabre book that young people tend to like. I will still give this to 15, 16, 17-year-olds to read, because it was the book that really knocked me out at that age. And it's very gothic. There's a lot of gothic elements to it, really over-the-top stuff, but it's not as gothic as I sort of remembered it. The last thing I recall was reading the Frank biography is when he was a young man, Dostoevsky was a big fan. We talked about her, Anne Radcliffe, and all the British Gothic novels. And as a kid, he sat around with his family, and they would read the Italian and all these Anne Radcliffe novels out loud every night after dinner. And that kind of, he's a literary writer with really big ideas about the people in Russia. There's lots of stuff we haven't even talked about. Satires and engaging a lot of the political arguments of his time. There's a lot of that being discussed in this book. And he's interested in all of those, but he always tells this great story at the same time. So you can't, and he stays so, for a 550-page novel, he's so close to that one point of view almost entirely through the entire book that it's a tour de force. I don't like that phrase. I know it's a cliche, but it's a tour de force. All right, stay safe. We're going to do another one of these really quickly in the same shirt, and have a great bath with Dostoevsky. Bye. Or as they say, Doistuh-Voisky. That's the proper Russian translation. Pronunciation is Doistuh-Voisky. You can tell him I told you that. Bye.